So about the song that I posted from my the artist Krista McCutcheon, Two Queens. It that's the reason why sometimes you undermine the importance of music because it conveys information in it. Then you have some music that doesn't convey any kind of information. But what I've learned from that song was that it's a historical thing. It's very historical because it has a message inside of the music, and when you're reading a particular person, you get a certain sense of what they're conveying. So, she was talking about two queens, and one was Mary, the Queen of Scots, and the other one was Queen Elizabeth. And as you get into the story, you tend to unravel other things, pertaining to that story. And why it's important to know those things is because those events had an influence or effect on us today. See, our history, it details our present, and with that, it would detail our future as well. So, when I got into the story, I found out that Mary, Queen of Scott, is actually King James, the author of the Bible, that is, or the one that has a particular version of the Bible, that is his mother, and when you start to um, look into it, especially as a seer, as one that sees, you start to see, certain things that were always hidden about the history of certain things. So, what I understood was that Mary, the Queen of Scots, had a stake to the hair of the seat or the crown of both Scotland and England due to her lineage. And Queen Elizabeth also had stake, but there was discrepancies in her claim because her father, who was King Henry, had an annulment, and that um, kind of excluded Queen Elizabeth from, having any kind of claim to succession. So, so that lies, there lies the discrepancy with the two of them. One was um, legitimate heir, and the other was an illegitimate heir. According to historical accounts. But the thing that's more intriguing is that it was political, and it had a religious involvement because the both of them were had two different religious views, and because there was a political agenda attached to these religions, as far as Mary, the Queen of Scots, was Catholic, was Roman Catholic, and Queen Elizabeth was a Protestant, and they was seeking to reform the church and establish a royalist approach to the church, where the king had ultimate authority, as opposed to in the Catholic religion, the Pope had was the authoritative figure. And that is where these particular um, parties, they had rivalry at, where they wanted the king to have the ultimate power, like absolute power, when we're talking about a monarchy. So that was the reason for them not wanting to have the church over them. This is where um, Protestant come from. They protested, like protests. They protested certain claims and um, accused the church of not adhering to biblical practices, and was capitalizing off of the church, as opposed to implementing Christ-like values. But that doesn't mean that the church under a monarchy would have strong adherence to Christian-like values as well. But that was the argument, the reason for the separation. And this becomes part of, if you're in the church, whether you're a Catholic or you're a Christian today, this becomes part of the history of how um, these religions, or your religion today, came about. It came through, especially if you have the Bible, the King James version, because now we're going to try to understand his role in those particular events. When King James was born, his mother was taken away from her. Like, she was actually targeted, and um, they use intimidating practices to take her kingdom away from her, take her seat away from her. And then behind the scene, they were going to control her offspring, which was King James. So King James is a product of corruption and greed, if you want to look at it like that. These was corrupt officials, because there's documented um, is documented in the history that they had conspired against Mary, the Queen of Scots, and locked her up. That's why in the song you hear, you could lock me away in a tower, and you hear certain things that's being stated about those events. Like I said, the song isn't just a song to listen to and just oh, that was a nice song. It has a meaning behind it, and the agreement was for King James to take seat as the king, or hold the crown, and that was a part of the agreement. So as a mother, you was taken away from your son for political reasons, so that the abolishment of Catholicism would be enacted, and Protestant would be incorporated into Scottish society. And also, it would have a greater tie with England. So this is what I'm getting from that particular, those events. They were, because, like I said, he became king right at 1 years old. Where the queen Mary, the Queen of Scots, she became here at, I believe, 6 days old because her father was killed. So like I said, the history has a lot of bloodshed and a lot of violence and a lot of corruption and a lot of it just has a sordid history behind it, you know. And these events is where our religions come from today. That's the reason why I made it known that, you know, you can't have an understanding of life and attribute life to being in a religion. You know, religions are man-made institutions that come from a form of political control. And if you don't, you know, you might want to go and research that and study it and get into the details of it, because that's actually what religion is. You know, throughout the course of history, that's it, from whatever, you know, time period or epoch you have. You know, religion has always been a part of the politics and the means of, you know, controlling civilizations or even empires. So the Catholic Church, or the Roman Catholic Church, was a big deal at one point in time, and then, you know, the birth of um, adverse religious movements had moved to step away from those practices and and still incorporate and adhere to, you know, biblical practices, but on their own terms, where, you know, you had the divine right of kings. And, you know, with Western civilization, they use the Bible as their personal history book. And, you know, that's kind of far from the truth, you know. And it has been attributed to them having a divine connection to the source of those events. And like I stated, you know, when some of us see, we know exactly where, you know, all stories come from, you know, and all biblical stories, all we see and we know. And it doesn't have any kind of correlation with England or anything with Europe at all, you know. So this is what we do know. But, you know, for them to have this understanding that they are appointed by God to dictate and control humanity, civilizations, and societies, that's, you know, a mistaken idea. That leave that alone, dog. That's been going around for ages now. You know, there's been ages that people have done things under the assumed authority of a god, and, you know, that led to a lot of destruction and a lot of casualties under, you know, these false ideas. And, you know, that is the reason why certain things have to be unraveled and brought to light, so that, you know, justice may prevail. And in the case of Mary Queen of Scott, the Queen of Scott, we find out that, you know, there was a lot of wrongdoing in, you know, what they actually did to her. They kidnapped her. They took her away from King James. Put isolated her. Forced her to abdicate from seat. And and not only that, but they also lied on her and brought up fictitious charges of treason, where you had advisors of Queen Elizabeth that had forged documents stating that she was planning to assassinate Queen Elizabeth, and they brought her up on charges of treason, you know. But that wasn't true. And then you see the the emerging of certain other practices, where you had the Scottish Lords. And if you was to find out today, the Scottish Lords, they have an affiliation with certain um, fraternal orders today. And also Washington, not Washington, but Washington, who was the one that forged the documents and used spy-like tactics to target people. It was the first spy master and was the central intelligence agent for Queen Elizabeth. And this is where you would probably get the Central Intelligence Agency today. But they use underhanded practices in order to achieve goals. And this is something that you see just by taking a peek at it. You're not even delving into the depths of it. This is only on the surface of it that you're able to gather this type of information. So that's basically what I'm stating, because we have a Bible which is the King James version, and today that is the overall, the overall or the most authorized version of the Bible. But what we don't understand is that King James was someone that believed that he had a divine inheritance, but at the same time he was partly responsible for what actually happened to his mother, for corrupt means, for greed and corruption, was behind that. Actually, it was, so we hold, these Bibles, or that particular Bible, as it's coming from a divine source. But when you get into the background or the history of it, you will find out that there was nothing holy or righteous about King James. So it's like getting biblical teachings from a, 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 a Satanist, or that's just a way to say it, like getting the Bible from the devil himself. It doesn't come from an authoritative, a person with the actual authority of God behind it. So that's why I state that you can, the Bible can be used for wisdom, or it can be used for knowledge purposes, but don't think that that's just the absolute outlet or source to God, because people will become mistaken by that and think because they have the Bible or they know the Bible, they know God or what God is or who God is. Because like I stated, it's been something that's been used to impose or force their will on civilization from time after time again. And that's just you being honest of what you see, and you have no, I have no other choice but to say that, because if not, then you're just as guilty as the people that has went around welding it in the name of God, but has also been responsible for all sorts of innocent bloodshed. King James has a lot of blood on his hands for witch hunts, and also um, the Catholics and all sorts of conflicts that was um, fought. Like there's a history of a sordid history of the two warring with each other, and hundreds of thousands of casualties came out of those those actions, and it was all over political and religious um, debates. And today we still adhere to these religious practices, without accrediting them to our part of our mental disorder, our mental illness. We accredit these religions to the oneness and the truth of God, and we undermine how it has impacted societies for thousands of years, and still fail to address its involvement in our inability to live harmonious amongst each other. you know but that's just what religion is. But you know um they beheaded people, they hunted people, witches, and believed that others were um that they first, when it came to King James and the witch hunts, King James himself didn't have irrefutable proof of witchcraft. He had a speculation that because the woman that he was going to marry, um, when she was on her way from her country over to his country, there was a storm, and he accredited that storm to to witchcraft. Like he believed that witches were responsible for the storm. Then he set out himself to go and retrieve his wife, and again another storm had came. So he believed that to be a product of witchcraft, and from that moment on, he set out to persecute and target witches. So today, our dislike for witches and witchcraft and stuff like that has a source, and it comes from um, mistaken ideas of old. Like these was mistaken ideas, and they later came to grips with their ideas being mistaken and too extreme in nature. Burning people alive, and torturing them, and it was so many things that they did to people that was suspected of witchcraft. And today, society doesn't have any kind of regret or remorse or repentance to those acts. Because online you hear, witchcraft this or witchcraft that, and as if these wasn't actual people, and they just associated them with Satanism and demonology and this, that, and the third. But the people that was pointing the finger at them and accusing them of that was actually, that in disguise. So this is what I do understand about that, is that those actions were demonic themselves, you know, um, wrath and torturing and burning people alive, and under the name or guise of God is giving you the authority to do so. That is wrong. These are fallacious ideas, and they have been incorporated in um, our mental process of the law and order of God, and how God exacts judgment on people. And to this day, that's what we actually believe, you know. But like I stated, King James he was a pawn, you know. It was people that behind the scene that took his mother away and used him as a front for their power, for their agendas, you know. And he only can do what was in the scope for them to actually do. This is the reason why they was taking out kings and queens, because there was always parties amongst them that had other interests, and if they couldn't get the king or anyone that was in power interfered with their practices, they normally took them out. This is how it goes. You know, that is the history. That is their history. You know, and it's written. It's all this stuff is documented and recorded. You know, you're not saying anything wrong against righteous people. You're actually, you know, telling the truth. You know, Queen Elizabeth was threatened. You know, her authentic a legitimacy to the seat was threatened by Mary, Queen of Scots' existence. So, in order for her to have the rightful ownership of the crown, she had to get rid of Mary. You know, because like I stated, they wanted a dominant religion, which was the Protestant and Presbyterians and those particular churches that used the king as the sovereign, ruler, and you know, excluded the Pope from having any kind of authoritative role over them. So that is the reason why they have moved to to establish a reformed church. So we dealing with reformity and reforming and changing or reshaping. You know, so it's the church, but it's under the guise of being ran by appointed kings, you know, or hereditarily appointed kings. So the kingship was passed down from lineage, you know, from a divine lineage. And here we had the same thing that was active in Egypt with everything being handed down from divine lineage. So, you know, maybe they took the fashion after Egypt and established that order in you know, Europe. So that is actually, you know, what it actually was, you know. But you know, we can check out you know, the two queens. You know, if y'all wanted to go, and they probably even got movies about it, but I've never seen it. And even if I did seen it before, you know, I'm not interested in, you know, those particular times. But even those particular times, being that England had influence on events that happened over here in America. If you want to get to, you know, the under the surface of, you know, certain events, then you would probably have to go and check out those times, you know. But to this day, we still have monarchies and royal lineage that, well, people believe they're royal lineage, but they're not, you know, really royal. You know, they don't have, you know, what you would call a genuine connection to a divine source. They just have an assumed belief that they are divine, you know, which would make them believe that they are holy or divine people. But you know, that's definitely not the case, you know. But you know, so the two queens in one aisle, you know, So we did have that, you know. So there's books that you can actually read and get an understanding, you know, of, you know, from my understanding, Queen Mary, Queen of Scots, wasn't, um, she wasn't really a threat to her. She was just who she was, and she couldn't be anything other than who she was, and they was both female descendants, and the male descendant is the one that usually um, obtained the crown. So when Queen Mary gave birth to King James, you know, they used that against her. They moved in on her and got her to, um, by force, got her to sign a letter of resignation, like she had to resign, and or they was going to kill her. Basically, they told her that, if you don't resign, we're going to kill you. You know, and they tried to get her to admit to certain things that she didn't do. And then she escaped a few times. She was kidnapped and brought to another kingdom and was made to be the wife of another king, and she ultimately escaped from there. And then she tried to seek refuge with her cousin, which was Queen Elizabeth, and Queen Elizabeth betrayed her. She invited her. She told her that she'll give her um, refuge there. She can be sheltered there, but she also locked her up and kept her away from people. You know, and one of Queen Elizabeth's um, um, subjects, or her somebody amongst her who she called the spy master, was one that devised a plan to actually get rid of her, because the queen, being that they was cousins, she kind of didn't have the right to just impose justice on her. But they got her to, they um used entrapment with some people that Mary, Queen of Scots, knew, and they was going to try to break her out of the confines that Queen Elizabeth had her in. So they was writing back and forth, and they was trying to devise a way for them to help her escape and bring her back to Scotland so she could resume heir of the throne. Because at that time, King James was running things behind the scene, but because his mother was still alive, he really didn't have the ultimate role of being the acknowledged and regarded king, because she still she was there. So the spy master you know used trickery and entrapment to um, um, to persecute the her support, you know, and they end up um, they had spies all over the place like they have today. When we talk about the targeted individual program and how many people is here and there, they had them everywhere. This is old and ancient practices that was used even back in those days. Again, Mary, Queen of Scots, was targeted and for her position because she posed a threat to Queen Elizabeth's position. They really wanted to do away with Catholicism. And Mary, Queen of Scots, was one that upheld Catholicism, and even the Pope, even her son, even King James could have done something, to prevent those events from transpiring, but they did not. you know so there was, that you have to be, inquisitive about, like, why didn't, her son, who was the King of Scotland, seek to, give her asylum and give her refuge over there? Or why didn't the Pope, who, was such this big and authoritative figure over the Catholic Church, why didn't he seek to, get her, sheltered? These are things that we have to ask ourselves, especially about historical events that, we still see the Catholic Church today. We still see Christianity and what Christianity is today, with Protestants, Presbyterians, Catholic, Baptist, Episcopal, or however it's pronounced. But we do see that these churches, they have been reformed, and after a certain while, even those forms of church was reformed. So the Christian church, only adhering or acknowledging Jesus Christ as the authoritative figure. So, we see the steps that it took for Christianity to become what it is today. But that's something that we should look at, and seek to address, especially any kind of mistaken ideas of the past before we had a certain level of advanced understanding. So now we do today. So do we continue to have mistaken ideas? For instance, a mistaken idea that's easily corrected is, at times, I tell you that there's an owl, outside. There's an owl somewhere out there. There's an owl, and that was a mistaken idea because owls are normally nocturnal. And when I hear what I believe was an owl, you know, it has been brought to my understanding that it's not an owl, it's actually a mourning dove. They have similar calls, so if you're not familiar with what an owl call is, you would mistaken a mourning dove as that, and I told, my cat that, son, you don't want to go out there. There's an owl out there, and we know that owls prey on, small creatures, and cats can be, prey for owls as well. So that is a mistaken idea that has been corrected just by, having a mind open to correction, which is a mind that's what you would call righteous, because I wouldn't seek to understand that, even though I hear it in the daytime, it's an owl. Owls are nocturnal, owls are nocturnal. Morning doves, they sound exactly like owls, or they have a similar hoot like an owl does, or call like an owl does. So, that idea that was mistaken has easily been rectified. So a lot of ideas that we have that are mistaken can be easily rectified in the same fashion. Only thing that would keep mistaken ideas from being rectified is pride. You know, only thing that can keep mistaken ideas from being rectified is pride. You know, so you do have to understand that, in England and stuff, in England and in Europe, period, these are proud people. You know, they have used pride, to um, carry out certain things or to justify certain things. But when you're wrong, you're wrong. You know, so you know that's one of the reasons why I felt the need, to share what I found. Because if people were to correct mistaken things that were mistakes of the past, you can proceed with a clean slate and a new approach to certain things, as opposed to perpetuating them and allowing them to dictate um, you know events that from there came from those actions, and allow those actions to be what is used to dictate civilization today. you know because you're bonded by your past until you confront the things of the past that have you bond or stuck to, that you're stuck to. you know and you know this is how you forgive your past. You don't live in the past and keep dwelling on the past. You live in the past and keep dwelling on the past by allowing your past to live in your present. So if we know that these events were mistakes of the past, and we haven't addressed them or confronted them, we continue to walk in those same mistakes. We are product of those same mistakes, especially if we don't want to address them. If we see them and just continue to undermine them. So that's what all religions, especially religious people or people that's tied to these religions, today, that were a product of those religions of the past. So that is part of your history. You know, that is that's part of the history of that religion. If it's in America and it's English, then it comes from the English Reformed Church. If it's Catholic and it's here, then it comes from Catholicism, from the Holy Roman Empire. So we do know that they were conflicting sides, and they have a history of war, um, and bloodshed, and imposing or enforcing their will on others, and not to mention, the atrocities that were done to women under the name of religion, under Christianity and Catholicism. There was both atrocities that today, is barely discussed in anything that's, just because it's not discussed doesn't mean that it never happened. And just because you believe that it never happened doesn't mean that it doesn't have to be addressed. So basically that's, where you're going with it. But like I said, that was a very powerful song, and that song led me to, you know, um, find out certain things about those particular people. And as you find out things about those particular people, you find things out about others. you know you know And like I told you, your whole objective isn't to um, expose with the purpose of um, dragging people or dragging anything down or dragging anyone belief down. Your purpose is to, expose with the purpose of correcting. You should be able to correct wrong actions, so that you can move forward from those wrong actions, because underneath it all, um, they still lie there. They're still underneath, all and everything that was birthed from it, you know. So, you know, you wanted to share, what you found out about that, you know. And that's one thing that you did find out about it, you know. You know, and you find it, you know, part of the history, you know, you know, you know. So you can just hear, Mary Queen of Scots was kidnapped by William Ruthven, first Earl of Gorey, in 1582. This event occurred shortly after the murder of her husband, King Henry Lord Donnelly, in 1567. Mary was taken to Lockville Castle, where she was held captive until her escape in 1583. You know, so you know, um, so you do, you know, we do have, history that if you was to, find out about it, you would come up with the conclusion, oh, what's up, man? You know, mm, you know, come on, bruh. Oh, I'm allergic to you, man. But no, these was young women. You know, at least she was like 45, or 44, 45 when she was um, executed. You know, they one of the things that they did, to execute nobles was to they would cut their heads off. So this was um, acts of European acts. Then they had drawing, and what was the other one? Where they would tie you to horses and have them all go in different directions. Like pull your body apart. You know, but those things is really nothing you can do about only thing you can do about is look at them and, ask yourself, were those, you know, done under the authority of a righteous God, or was that just man, exerting power? You know, you know, that's what happened. Men began to exert power over um, queens, and start to um, use them in a way that was dictative, and you know that's what happened anyway to Mary, Queen of Scots. But as far as Queen Elizabeth, she did have the church, the Reformed Church, that was in opposition to the Catholic Church. And then after that, they started to form certain other you know things outside of that. Like I told you, when you had Washington. Let me show you the name. Walsingham. Francis Walsingham. He oversees operations that penetrated Spanish military preparation, gathered intelligence from across Europe, disrupted a range of plots. You know, when the incriminating letter from Mary was intercepted in Walsingham's office, his assistants drew a gallows on it. Mary had hanged herself. Queen Mary was tried in late 1586. So they called this guy Spy Master General. You know, So here you have root of spy masters and being a central spy officer. You know, but you know but even so, you understand that today his name is synonymous to a lot of Masonic lodges in England. So that's just one thing. Like the family name is associated with that. You know. You know. So it wasn't like you gotta understand. You gotta look at the odds. When you got basically two countries. That's already established behind a person, and you're being isolated, even cut off from your own child, who is acting in your seat. And how much can you attack a person that has all the elements of power, that's all powerful. you know so that's one of the things that you have to be aware of and understand. Like, why would you know this woman seek to assassinate somebody whose protection you're under? Even though she had her quarantined inside of her living quarters. She had a pretty decent life. She had pets. She had servants. She was treated good. So what would be the cause of me? You know what I mean? Doing away with. You know what I mean? So the purpose of that is that if something was to happen to Mary, um, I mean, if something happened to Queen Elizabeth, if Queen Elizabeth um, fell ill and died, and while um, Mary, Queen of Scots, was still alive, she had the ability to take both seats. Where she could have incorporated Catholicism as the national and or nationally recognized religion of England, and they didn't want Catholicism to have that dominance. So that's the reason why she was taken out the picture, and um, um, King James was groomed by the people that had a political interest in allowing Protestant um, Christianity to have dominance. So, you know, being that, these are historical facts, you know, we should, look into them and see how we could make those things, right. Being that we can't go back into time and change things, but how do we, allow ourselves to move forward, you know, and first address those, things that was wrong, and then move forward. So how do we address those things that we know for a fact, was wrong, you know, and then move forward, you know, because again, like I stated, religion has done more harm to humanity than good, you know, it has, and until religion becomes um, a thing that um, has benefited humanity, I personally, I wouldn't associate myself with any of them, any of them. But that's just me, and that's just something that I felt like sharing. So, you know, that's why I tell you, that song was became my favorite song because I learned something, in that song, and it came from you understanding the spirit and how it was emotionally given to you. It was emotionally given to you, not from the perspective of Queen Elizabeth the first, um, being innocent of anything, or that Mary, Queen of Scots, was a victim of anything, but she gave it to you from a perspective of what was right and what was wrong, you know so you found out that there was some things that was done wrong in there, and then you found out about Bloody Mary. Bloody Mary was, like, we might talk about the drink, but we don't know that it was actually a queen named Bloody Mary that ordered the death of a lot of Protestant Christians. So again, this thing has a deep-rooted history in conflict between Catholics and Christians, you know, and yeah, yeah. So I hope that was insightful, but if it's not, then maybe it wasn't for you. Truth isn't going to be for everybody. Change isn't going to be for everybody. For those that benefit from certain things, from anything that may be destructive, they would not be apt to change destruction or change anything that is beneficial to it. But for those that may have had any kind of adverse experience to destruction, then you would want certain things to change, but I'm gonna leave it on that note. So peace.